wanted to start this evening by talking to you a little bit about where you came from, Philadelphia, and some of the musicians who you played with in that milieu at that time, and also who was your kind of early group of influences. Who did you really start listening to? What made you want to be a jazz musician, you know? What do you remember hearing very early on?
Well, some of the people, I'll start with the first part of it. Some of the people that I played with, we were all aspiring musicians then. None of us were professionals then, of course. As I said before, Jimmy Heath was there. Percy Heath, his brother, had just gotten out of was the Army Air Force then. He was a pilot in Tuskegee, and he began to bass. I think he was in his late 20s when he got started, but he joined us. His brother, Tootie, came later, but Philly Joe was there, who was just a little older than the rest of us. And, of course, John Coltrane was there, and Ray Bryant, and a trumpet player named Johnny Coles, and various others. I can't think of all of them right now, but we were all there. And we were aspiring jazz musicians, you know. And the thing that got me started, when I started, I didn't begin as a saxophone player. At 9 years old, I started taking piano lessons, and I was serious about becoming a concert pianist. That was really my goal.
You were studying classical music on the piano?
Yes, yes. And I was really serious about it. My teacher used to send me out after I got a little repertoire together, and I would play for the ladies' Sunday afternoon teas and little fashion shows and things like that. But then when I reached 14, I went to the Earl Theater downtown Philadelphia to hear Lionel Hampton. And he had a saxophone player named Arnett Cobb. And they went into a song called Flying Home. And Arnett stepped out of the saxophone section onto the stage to the microphone and swooped into that memorable solo on Flying Home, and the piano went up in smoke. It was an epiphany for me, yeah. And of course I went home and I told my mother about it, and she was brokenhearted because she wanted me to play the piano and to play the organ later at the Baptist church and all of that. But I had different things in mind, and I promised her that I would continue to take the piano lessons if I could play the saxophone. And I did both for a couple of years, and then she could see that the saxophone was real, and she let it go. And that's how I got started. And then I started listening. You asked me who did I listen to. I listened to everybody. I was eclectic. I had nothing to draw upon myself, so I had to draw upon what other people were doing. So I listened to saxophone players, trumpet players, piano players, guitar players, everybody, to see how they improvised, what they were thinking about, how they arrived at certain things. This was all new to me, you know.
At that time, now that year that you heard Hamp, was that 1943, 44?
I'll have to count back now. Give me a minute. That was about mid-40s.
Yeah.
The mid-40s, yeah. 45, something like that.
So at that time, when you were listening to musicians, were you particularly impressed by other saxophonists besides Arnett Cobb, other tenor players?
Oh, yes. Coleman Hawkins came into the picture. Then Ben Webster. I liked that full sound. And later, Lucky Thompson.
Yeah.
Then much later, Dexter Gordon.
Yes.
You know, these were my heroes.
Sure.
You know, I was aspiring to try to be like them. I used to copy their solos, go to the jam sessions, and don't play my thoughts, play their thoughts.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but it developed, you know, later. It was a good learning tool.
Sure. I'm curious to ask you, the piano study, do you think that had any effect on your later arranging and composing activities? Do you think it gave you a grounding sort of in harmony that you might not have had otherwise? Or?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, because I can still play the piano. Yeah. In college, I even did a few gigs on piano, but I was a bad piano player, not very good. Saxophone was my thing. Yes, it did. Having a knowledge of the keyboard and being able to read what you see, and the keyboard is really the entire orchestra, even more. It goes higher and lower than so everything was right there for you, and it was easy for me to assimilate the things I was hearing in my mind to the keyboard and liken it to what the orchestra was doing. So if anybody, you don't have to, it's not axiomatic, but if you can learn some piano before you get started on whatever instrument you want to play, it gives you a broader view of what's going on, an overall view.
Can you remember, you mentioned during your musical set hearing Charlie Parker for the first time and how that kind of turned your conception around of what might be possible in improvising. Can you talk about that a little bit and what was different about Bert and what it did to your conception?
Oh, yes. And now during that time, Don Bias was my hero. I had several heroes during the period. But Charlie Parker was so different that I was taken aback. And when I heard him, John Coltrane and I were together. And
where did you hear him? Do you remember?
The Academy of Music on Locust Street in Broad in Philadelphia, downtown, in the afternoon. And I remember it was in the afternoon because when it was over, John and I were getting autographs from Dizzy Gillespie, and I think Slam Stewart was the bass player. They hadn't gotten a hip bass player yet because he was still slapping the strings. And I think Al Haig was the piano player. I don't remember the drummer. So after it was over, we were back there like kids do. Can I have your autograph? Can I have it? And we called Charlie Parker Mr. Parker because we were kids. I said, John, Mr. Parker's leaving the stage door because he had a gig at the Downbeat Club. See, the concert was in the afternoon and it ended around 7, and he had to play at the club at 9, so he was going over there. And the rhythm section waiting for him was Philly Joe Jones, Red Garland, and a bass player named, what was the bass player's name? I can't remember the bass player, but they were waiting for him and he was going to play with them. So we rushed. We hadn't gotten his autograph either, so we rushed out, and we asked, could we walk with him? So John was on the left, and I was on the right, and he was playing so much, I figured if I could get some insight to what he was playing, that maybe John and I would be able to play like, because we couldn't play like that. And so I began. Before that, John asked him, can I carry your horn, Mr. Parker? And so he let him carry the saxophone. And I was thinking all the while, why don't I see some of my friends that know me and see me walking down the street with Charlie Parker? That's nobody. So while we were walking to the club, it was only about 4 blocks away, I was asking dumb stuff like, thinking I was going to get an insight of what he was doing and go home and do it. What kind of saxophone do you play? Yeah. And he told me, okay, and I cataloged that. What kind of mouthpiece do you use? And he told me the mouthpiece. Mr. Parker, what kind of reeds do you use? And he told me. What strength do you use? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And he told me that. And I figured, okay, I got it all together. So we got to the club. Of course, we were too young to go up there. And so John gave him the horn, and he went up. It was on the second floor. And they started soon after. And we stayed there. They played from 9 till 2 in those days, you know. And we stayed outside because we could hear everything they were doing. And we stayed from 9 till 2. And when they finished, John and I were just as tired as they were. It was incredible. And so this was in South Philadelphia, and we both lived in North Philadelphia. We never had any money, so we had to walk home. But on the way home, we were dreaming, what if? Do you think? What was that? Maybe we can get, what if? Maybe, can I? Is it possible? So John and I used to talk every day. And we didn't talk for about 2 weeks because we'd both gotten the same information about the horn and the mouthpiece and the reeds and everything. And finally he called me after about 2 weeks. And he said, Benny, did you try any of that stuff that Mr. Parker was telling us? I said, yeah. He said, did anything happen? I said, no. He said, me either. Same old stuff was coming out. The reed, the mouthpiece. It wasn't any of that. It was crazy.
Did you, after that, did you start sitting down with the recordings and trying to break it down and copy solos?
Oh, yes, John and I used to be together every day. And when we bought those 78 records, I remember, it was 37 cents. When we bought them, they were black and shiny, the shellac one. And we played those records, boy, until they turned gray and dull. And during those times, the tone arm, you had to put the needles in, unscrew the screw, put the needle in, screw it back, and you could get about 10 plays, and then after that it got a little distorted. Let me tell you something funny. And during that time, the science class, the teacher brought in a tuning fork, and she struck it. She gave each one of us a tuning fork, and she struck it. She says, now hold it, put it to your head. And when I did, the sound was in my head. I said, wow, that's fantastic. Then I struck it, and I put it in my teeth, and it went through my whole head. I said, wow. And I got home, and I said, now I take that phonograph needle and put it to the tone arm, what would happen if I put it in my teeth?
Oh, no.
And I put it in my teeth and turned it on and slowly put my head down to the record. Instant stereo. The band was in my head. It was fantastic.
Are you serious?
I'm serious, yeah. I mean, that sound was right in my head like that tuning fork.
Don't try this at home. I advise.
And I told John, and then he started trying it. And then other musicians, well, I'm among the amateurs. And we could always tell who had been doing it because they had a smudge on their nose from the turntable.
Unbelievable story. I'm not sure how we can top that, but let me ask you, just before we get off this, is there a way that you could characterize for us succinctly what the change was that had happened there when you heard, I mean, musically speaking, what Bird represented in the music as a turning point?
Oh, yeah, it was the concept. Mm-hmm. The concept, and we didn't understand the concept. And what we were trying to play was traditional music, you know. How can I put it? Dun, 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 dun. We were engrossed in that, and then we heard I mean, trying to go from, and we didn't understand the other stuff yet, and we heard the new stuff, so we were in midstream with uncertainty, not sure. So, and we were amateurs, and so we were hard trying to go forward, and we were listening to everything, you know. And finally, we began to get onto it, of course, and John really got onto it.
How did you begin playing professionally? What were your early gigs, I guess, after you got out of Howard? How did you really break in? When did you know you were a professional musician as opposed to just an amateur, aside from getting paid for it?
Oh, it started before I went to college. And in fact, John and I were in the same band. It was called Jimmy Johnson and His Ambassadors. And it was a local band in Philadelphia, big band, 15 pieces. And during that time, strangely enough, there were many big bands in Philadelphia. And about 4 of the guys all had the same name, Jimmy. Jimmy Johnson, Jimmy Adams, Jimmy Shorter, Jimmy Singley. I mean, it was strange. But we were with Jimmy Johnson and His Ambassadors. And we used to work on the weekend, which was good for me because I was still in school, high school, Friday and Saturday night, or Saturday or Friday. And we thought we were moving ahead quite well because now we were playing in the band, playing music. And we had a chance to play solo every now and then, note 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 choruses, 4 bars here, maybe 8 bars here, never a whole chorus, you know. We were all playing stock arrangements, you know. And we thought we were doing pretty good because now we weren't playing in front of the record player. We were playing on a stage and going up to the microphone like the big boys, you know. And we were feeling pretty comfortable knowing that we were moving ahead until the band leader sent his son by to tell me that the job that Friday night had been canceled. And he told John, and we assumed he told everybody else. And we were heartbroken because we lived for those gigs, you know. Didn't pay much money. We didn't have a tuxedo. Being in one of the ambassadors, we had to play in a tuxedo. So we had to rent the tuxedo every time we played. And the tuxedo cost $4. The job paid $8. So we went home with $4. But it was the music we were concerned about, not the money. So anyway, we were told the gig was canceled, and we were sitting down listening to the 78s like we always did. And my mother happened to come down, and she said, "Why the long faces?" And we said, "Oh, the gig was canceled, you know," and we were really looking forward to it. And she says, "Well, what time did he send his son by?" He sent him by, it's about 6:30 here. He came to my house. And she said, "What time was the gig?" 8 o'clock. She said, "Nobody cancels a job an hour and a half before time to play." She said, "I'll bet you they're playing without you." Ooh. And John, in all of his naivete, said, "Oh, no, Mrs. Golson, they wouldn't do that." She said, "If it was me, I'd go up there and see." I looked at John. John looked at me. He said, "Let's go." So it was only about 6 or 7 blocks away, so we walked up there to the American Legion Hall, where the gig was canceled. We got a half a block from the hall, and we heard this band playing. John said, "They're playing our music." I said, "John, every band in Philadelphia plays the same music. We have to see who they are." So when the door opened, the next paying customer went down. We could hear the band loud, yeah. but we couldn't tell if it was Jimmy Johnson and his ambassadors. So the next time, because you had to go down the steps and across the ballroom floor. So the next time the door opened, we fell on our stomachs, and we could see somebody was in my chair, somebody was in John's chair. Oh, we went back to my house, boy, we were brokenhearted. And we went in, he said, "You were right, Mr. Golson." And we went into the living room, and we usually sat down and put the record player on. We just stood in the middle of the floor not knowing what to do. I wanted to cry, and I know John wanted to cry, but we couldn't cry in front of each other, And my mother saw the pain we were having, and she put her arms around both of us and squeezed us and said, "Don't worry, baby. One day you'll be so good they won't be able to afford you." We didn't believe it. But years later, we were up at the Newport Jazz Festival, and somehow John and I happened to be in the same tent, warming up. And he was warming up on the soprano. He had just recorded My Favorite Things. And Art Farmer and I just formed the Jazztet, and we were warming up and noodling. And all of a sudden, he took his horn out of his mouth, and he started laughing hilariously. And I said, what? He said, "Remember what your mother told us? That one day we'd be so good they wouldn't be." Yeah. He said, "Well, those guys are still in Philadelphia, and we're here."
Yes.
Yeah.
Amen. Did that kind of instill? Did you, after that happened, did you kind of think, okay, now I'm gonna pull out a blade, I'm gonna really practice harder, or did you just get depressed for a while, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, something like that can do one of two things. It can make you give up and become hopeless, or make you go at it.
I guess it was door number 2.
Like a wild beast, and we both went at it like a wild beast.
Let me ask you a little bit about moving into the 50s when you really kind of hit your stride professionally. I want to ask you a little bit about when you began to compose and arrange. I know that you had a special place in your life for Tadd Dameron, great composer and arranger.
Later I did, yeah.
That was later on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You played with his band, yes, in the early 50s?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit? I think you were playing originally, you said before, with Bull Moose Jackson. Can you tell us how that came?
That's where I met him.
That was a jump blues gig, sort of.
Yeah, that's where I met him. He was the piano player.
With Bull Moose Jackson?
With Bull Moose. You'll never believe who the drummer was.
Go ahead.
And he played good rhythm and blues drum. Philly Joe Jones.
Really?
Yeah, was the drummer.
Mm-hmm. So there was more than just a jump blues band then, I guess. Did you have sort of jazz little specialties?
Oh, yes. And Bull Moose and Tadd Dameron grew up together in Cleveland, you see, and that's how. And Tadd was at Liberty, we say. He wasn't working.
Right.
And Bull Moose said to him, "Well, look, you can make a few gigs with me until, you do what you want to do." And he was there in the band during that time when he was at Liberty, you see, from his thing that he really did. And
what year is that about, Benny, would you?
51.
Yeah.
51. And then I was in his band in 53, as was Clifford Brown and some others. Yeah. And one thing led to another, and eventually we all left Moose and Bill Moose, and he finally put together a band in 53, and
this is Tadd Dameron.
Tadd Dameron, yeah, and was going into a new club there called what was it? The Paradise, for the whole summer. See, for the whole summer season from June to Labor Day in September, and in that band was Gigi Grice, Cecil Payne, Philly Joe, Jimmy Merritt. Did I say Clifford Brown?
You mentioned him earlier. But
Johnny Coles was a trumpet player, and Tadd. It was a 9-piece band. It wasn't a very big band. And believe it or not, we played mostly the show stuff, the girls singing and the tap dancer, but in between shows we got to play a couple of things, but not much, And we weren't making much money, and we were working 7 days a week with a breakfast show on Saturday. So when we went to work, we'd usually get off at 2. We'd have a little break, and then we'd play the breakfast show from about 3 to 6.
Oh.
And we were getting $100 a week.
Wow.
Yeah, it wasn't
Even
much.
in today's dollars, whatever that would be today.
Not so good.
Did you get any specific advice or tutelage or anything on arranging from Tadd Dameron?
Oh, yes. This man shared everything he knew. He had no secrets. He shared everything. Anything I'd ask him, he was quite copious. He'd bring it out. I remember when he started listening to some of those things because I began to write for the band too. And he would look at it and hear it said, how did you arrive at this? This is wrong. That's not the right chord, and things like that, and that's how I learned. And then he was writing for different people. He was writing for Ted Heath's band, and he was doing something for Duke Ellington, and he let me copy it. And as I copied the chart, I'm looking at what he's doing and how it would sound.
Yeah.
He let me do things like that. And that was an apprenticeship for me. And then I got pretty good at it. I got so good at it that when people would come and hear the band, he had certain of his arrangements that we played.
Yeah.
And they would play my arrangements, and they would say to him, "Jake, that was a great arrangement, Tadd, you did on what of the and it was my arrangement." And he came to me and said, "That's a drag. You write it, and they come and thank me for writing, and you wrote it." But he was really very happy about it. He was proud, but he was feigning,
Right, sure. Yeah. Terrific.
Yeah.
Now, you joined, would you say your next major gig after that was with Dizzy Gillespie? In there, you played with Earl Bostic, didn't you, and Johnny Hodges?
No. Dizzy Gillespie came down the line.
Okay.
The next gig was Lionel Hampton.
Okay.
Lionel Hampton. I didn't stay there too long. Quincy Jones was in the band, and they came to see the show, and they heard us play what we played between the show, and they heard what we did as jazz musicians, and he went back and told Hamp. And so Hamp wanted Gigi Grice, Clifford Brown, and me to join the band. But the owner of the club said, no, we had a contract. He said, no, you can't do that. You got to stay here till Labor Day. So I said, well, okay, look, let Clifford and Gigi go, and I'll stay here and help the other guys, the new guys coming in, to really learn the show. So he agreed to that. So I joined him 2 weeks later after, helping the new guys like that. But I didn't stay with him too long.
Did you go to Europe with Hampton?
No, I left before that. I said, me and my principals. The money was so weak, and what happened, they promised to pay me more than they had been used to paying. And I said, okay. So I joined the band, and I met them, I think, in South Carolina, and we played down in the South. And then we got to Columbia, South Carolina, and Hamp's wife, who was like the business manager, she came on the scene. Now, the road manager had promised me this money. And when she came and heard that, she said, no way. And I quit.
Gladys did? She
chopped that off. Now, the band was getting $19 a night, each man, and he had promised to pay me $22, you see. And she said, no deal. Now, right after that, they played, there was a club next to Berlin, I thought, the Bandbox. Yeah. And the week after that, they went to Europe. And me and my principals, I quit. And I got a letter from Quincy. Oh, Benny, you should have come. We're here with the band, but we're doing record dates in Sweden, and we're doing this, and we're doing that. I said, oh, man. Yeah. But much later, I played with Hamp again, but it was with a small group. It was called the Golden Men of Jazz. There were about 7 of us, I think. Yeah. And I said, he used to be hard to get him off stage. This guy didn't know how to stop. I mean, when I was in the band for that short while, and I told my wife, oh, this is years later now, the man, I know when this is going to be an easy gig. He was worse. You couldn't get this guy. We played one gig, and everybody was applauding, and everybody left the bandstand,
Ham was still playing.
And he's playing by himself. We had to go back.
I want to jump forward a little bit because I know we don't have unlimited time. I want to talk to you a little bit about your time. Go ahead.
But I did move ahead.
Okay.
After Lionel Hampton, it was Tony Grimes. You ever remember? You used to play guitar with Art Tatum. Yeah. It was him for a short while. And then, where did I go? Then it was Earl Bostic. Then I played with Earl Bostic. Greatest technician on the saxophone I've ever heard in my life. Not the style, but the technique. The technique. Nobody could touch him. Incredible. And then I joined Dizzy.
Yes.
That was the band I got fired from. And the reason I got fired is I got tired of playing that kind of music. I wanted to play jazz, and I should have just quit. And it was all about him. Everything was him. The melody, the solo, and sometimes we just played the chord on into the tune.
You're talking about Dizzy?
Earl Bostic.
Oh, okay, all right.
Earl
That's
Bostic.
what I thought. Yeah.
And so I started doing silly things. When we go down south, he would take his guitar, because he played a little guitar, and he'd play down, down, da, 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 down. And I just, So during the intermission, I would tighten some of the strings, and I'd loosen some of the strings. And he'd come back, and he didn't tune it up. He just kicked the tune off and turned around. And when he got ready to play, it was horrible. He says, I don't know what's wrong with this guitar. Jeez, and I kept doing that. And so he did it one night, and the guys were looking at me laughing.
Oh, no.
I didn't get fired. And he was playing another night, and he was floor showing. And I decided to do a thing that I saw Illinois Jacket do. So while he's playing his solo now, and it was a dance, and some people were dancing, but some were standing at the edge of the stage. And he had his thing going, and I went behind the drummer, and I took my horn loose, and I got a running start, and I ran to the front of the stage like I was going to throw my horn in the audience, and I did like that and stopped, and everybody ducked, I got fired. And he gave me my 2-week salary. We were in Seattle, Washington. He says, partner, I got to let you go. But the next day, I got a call from Quincy Jones. Wow. He said, can you join the band, Dizzy's band? I said, yes. He said, when can you come? I said, tomorrow. Because if I hadn't gotten fired, Yeah. So that's when I joined Dizzy.
Sounds like you were ready to be out of that band.
I was ready. 1956, yeah.
What was it like playing with Dizzy? Now, did you arrange a fair amount for Dizzy's band?
After I was in the band a while, Ernie Wilkins was a heavy writer, and
Great
Quincy
writer.
had done some things. And I think I did Stablemates and Whisperknot and a few other things. I remember Clifford. And what was it like? Now, I had heard him on the records, and I'd gotten his autograph years ago. But sitting there, and I joined without a rehearsal, see. We opened at the Howard Theater. So I'm sitting in the saxophone section.
This
he's
is in
standing
D.C.?
with Disney, and he's standing there playing. And he played so much that when you hear somebody play that much, you could think, well, I'll never be able to play like that. You can get discouraged, or you can be encouraged. I was so discouraged. I said, I'll never be able to play like that. Yeah, hearing him play that stuff live. Yeah. And I wanted to say something to him to let him know how much I appreciated what he was doing. So when the show was over and everybody had left the band, a stage, he and I were the last two. And I said the corniest thing I could have said to this man, gee, Diz, you sure did blow. And the man was so humble. He said, oh, it was nothing. And it was everything. Yeah. And he shared all the knowledge he had. I mean, I went to his house once and went into his basement with him, and boy, he poured oil over me, with the stuff he was sharing. Incredible.
Fantastic. Now, you stayed with Dizzy, what, about 2 years, something like that?
Something like that.
And then did you go directly to Art Blakey's band from there?
Just about.
Yeah.
Just about, yeah.
And how did that come about? How did you
By
end up-
default. I went in as a sub, and
for whom?
I can't remember who it was right
Hank
now.
Mobley?
No, Hank wasn't in the band then. And for one night, and at the end of that night, he asked me, could I play the second night? I said yes. And this person was having problems, or they were sick or something. And he asked me, could he finish the week? Could I finish the week? Yeah. And I said yes. Then he asked me, could I become a permanent member? And I told him I'd like to, but I couldn't because I just come to town and I'm trying to establish myself, writing for commercials and singers and bands and whatever, So he said, okay. And the week was almost up. And he says, now, I know you don't want to leave New York, but I've got a week in Pittsburgh. It wouldn't hurt you if you left for 1 week and went to Pittsburgh with me, would it? Now, that first night, I'm playing with Art Blakey, and I never played with a drummer like that. And after the second night, and then the third night, and then the whole week, I'm getting deeper into it, So when he asked me, could I make that week, I said, oh, yeah, I can go to 1 week. And when we got to Pittsburgh, he was a psychologist, you see. We got to Pittsburgh, he said to me, he's drawing me in all the time, and I'm digging it. He says, now, I know you don't want to join the band, but didn't you go to Howard University in Washington, D.C.? I said, yes. He says, I bet you know a lot of people there in Washington. I said, oh, yeah, it's like a second home. He said, I bet you they'd be glad to see you, wouldn't they? I said, oh, yeah, I know so many people there. He said, I got 2 weeks there. You think you could make? I said, yeah, I was a messenger.
Yeah, who else was in the band at that point? Was that Lee Morgan in the band yet?
Lee Morgan, Bobby Timmons, and Jimmy Merritt.
Well, so, and you were with Art Blakey for about a year?
About a year.
And did he encourage you to write music for the band, or how did you do all that?
It's funny, when I suggested Blues March, he had a problem. I said, Art, you don't have anything special that we're playing. You need something that you would play from the very beginning, like you did on Thelonious Monk's Straight No Chaser, where it started off with just the drums, the right hand, the left hand, the right foot, and the left, all independent stuff. I said, you need something to draw the audience or the listener's attention to you from the very beginning. I said, all you're doing now is playing a drum solo at the end of a tune like every other drummer. I said, what could we do? And we were thinking there, sitting at the table, and I said, you played everything there is to play. I said, except the march. And we both laughed. Oh, how ridiculous. Then I said, oh, wait a minute. He said, you got to be kidding. I said, no, I'm not talking about military, like a Grambling in the South. When they play a march, it's got dirt and grease and little soul in it, He said, it'll never work, Golson. I said, let me try to see what I can come up with. And I was living up in Harlem then, and I went home, and I had a piano I'd bought for $50, and somebody had started to paint it green, and they got discouraged, so half was green and half was black. And I put this tune together, this march together, and I took it back, and I said, let's try it. He said, well, what do I do? I said, you start playing in the beginning. He said, well, what do I play? I said, play like we used to hear the American Legion bands coming through the neighborhood. Yeah. And when the bugles would stop, the drums and the cymbals would play. Try to imitate something like that. He said, well, how long do I play? I said, as long as you want. He said, well, how you and Lee know when to come in? I said, play me a roll-off. He said, what do you mean a roll-off? Well, I couldn't play the drum, so I had to do it with my mouth. Yeah. I said, play brum-dum, brum-brum, brum-dum. He said, Golson, it'll never work. I said, well, let's play it. And we were working up at Small's Paradise in New York, then up in Harlem. I said, let's play it and see what the people, how they react to it. And so we play, and I gave it a big build-up. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to play a tune that's unusual. It's a march. You don't usually play a march, blah, 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 blah. And we started off playing that thing, and we got into it. And there's no dance in the club, and they started dancing and bumping the tables and knocking the drinks over. And he saw what was happening. He says, I'll be, you know what. And he played it from that time until the time he died.
Great story.
Blues March. He had to play it.
I want to make sure that we talk a little bit. I know that period with Blakey was very fruitful, but then, of course, you formed one of the great, in my opinion, most critics' opinions, one of the great groups in jazz history, the Jazztet with Art Farmer.
Yeah.
What was the genesis of the Jazztet? I mean, were you still with Blakey when you had the idea to form your own band, or?
No, I wasn't with him. That's why the idea occurred to me.
Yeah.
And I thought, instead of a quartet or a quintet, which it was a plethora of those, but there weren't any sextets. Mm-hmm. And I thought, be nice to have sextet, and I could do a little arranging, get a certain sound. And I loved the way Art played, because when I joined Lionel Hampton, he was in the band too. Mm-hmm. Lionel Hampton and Quincy were in the band. Mm-hmm. And sort of formed an allegiance with him. And so I called him on the phone. I said, Art, I'm thinking about putting a sextet together, and I'd like to have you as my trumpet player. And he broke out into laughter. And so I'm saying, wow, what did I say? I said, what? He says, well, the reason I'm laughing, he said, I was thinking about putting a sextet together too, and I was going to call you tomorrow to be the tenor player.
Wow.
So I said, well, let's get together. And so we got together, and the name was not ours. We hired a fellow named Curtis Fuller as a trombone player, and he said, well, since it's a sextet and we're playing jazz, why don't we call it a Jazztet? And that's how it came about.
How many albums did you make with the Jazztet?
We made about, we made about 6 or 7 while we were together, yeah. And on the first one was Killer Joe, and that's what really got us started, yeah.
And do you ever play Park Avenue Petite anymore?
Don't play it much, but on my latest CD, we recorded it with Eddie Henderson.
Oh, really? Oh, great.
On Terminal 1, we call it, which was inspired by the Steven Spielberg film.
Well, this is something, just to jump across about 3 decades now, 4 decades actually. I want to make sure that I ask you about that. I want to take some questions from the audience after that. But since you brought it up, tell me a little bit, how did this come about that you were in this movie that Steven Spielberg directed?
I was in Europe at the time, and the office called me and said, Steven Spielberg called the office today, and he wanted to know, were you interested in a small speaking role in his new film with Tom Hanks? And I told him, no, I wouldn't be interested. And it sounds ridiculous, but the reason I said no, because in the past, Woody Allen's office called once about the same thing. But when I went to where I thought I was going to be the only one, it was about 10 guys for the same part. And I didn't get it. Then his office called another time, and I went, and it was about 15 or 20 guys.
So it was an audition. You were being called an audition.
And I didn't get it. And then I got a call for some TV commercials. I didn't get it. So I thought this is another one of those, because I said, I don't want to waste my time. And they said, no, I think he wants you. So when I talked to him, I know I'm not an actor. I said, well, I was concerned. I said, well, who will I be portraying? He said, yourself. Wow, I guess I could do that. So he sent me a script. Well, his office sent me a script and what I was supposed to say. So I went downtown and I took a screen test. And they said, oh, that's great. We'll send it out to California to Stephen. And then they saw the look on my face and they said, well, what's wrong? I said, well, that's not the way a musician would really say that in that sort of situation. So they said, well, we'll do it again and do it the way a musician would do it. So I did. And they sent it to him and he said, that's it. And so they had shot part of the film, which was called The Terminal, in Lancaster, California, just north of Los Angeles. And he said, we're going to do your part in Montreal, Canada. He said, we're going to build a nightclub set for you. What kind of a piano would you like? I said, a Steinway Grand. And when I got there, it was there.
Yeah.
But when I got there, then I found out what it was all about. I didn't really know. And it seems like in the picture, Tom Hanks was this fellow from some mythological Eastern Bloc country, and with this heavy accent. In fact, I told him, Tom, you sound like Dracula, when he was talking. And his father had died, and there was a photograph, Great Day in Harlem, that was taken in 1958, and his father had gotten everybody's autograph on that picture except Benny Golson. And his father died, and he wanted to get the autograph to complete. Wow. And he had all these autographs in this Planters peanut can. And somebody asked him what was in the can. He said, jazz. It was all the autographs that his father had. Sure. And then somebody else asked him later, what's in that can? He said, my father. See, and you didn't find out what was going on until the end of the picture, see. Right. And, well, eventually he did get to me, and he came to this club and saw me playing, and then we were playing Killer Joe or something like that. And he had on this suit, was like pearl lap. And the short coat and the pants had never seen a crease. And I said to him right in the middle of the scene, Tom, where did you get that suit? I got to get one just like it. But it turns out that Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks are jazz fans. Now, on that picture, Sonny Rollins is still alive, Horace Silver, Johnny Griffin, Marion McPartland. There's a drummer, I can't remember his name. I think there are about 7 of us left. And I wondered, why did he pick me? And you know what he told me? He said, I used to come and see you when I was a student in college.
Wow.
And he knew all the tunes.
Wow.
And same thing with Tom Hanks. And I sent them each like a lithograph of I Remember Clifford, and Stephen wrote me back. He said, that's always been one of my favorite tunes from your body of works. And Tom wrote me a letter and said, I've always loved that tune. The next time I play it, I'll try to follow the music, because it was the music on. Now, I don't know if he meant from a recording or from whatever instrument that he was playing. I'm going to ask him. I've gotten about 3 letters from him, but I haven't asked him yet. Does he play an instrument?
Yeah, you should.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, the specific photograph that Benny's talking about was taken in 1958 for Esquire.
That's right.
On a sort of a stoop in Harlem.
126th Street between Lenox Avenue and 7th Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it gathered, how many musicians?
There were about 58 of us there, yeah.
58 musicians from all eras of jazz up to that time, and including people.
Dizzy Gillespie was on it, Count Basie.
Monk was on it, Lester Young, Roy Eldridge, and
Thelonious Monk,
older generation people like Gene Krupa and Joe Jones, and Miff Mole, the trombonist. So it covered the whole gamut of, and those of you who don't know, there was a wonderful documentary about it that was, I think, originally called A Great Day in Harlem.
Great Day in Harlem.
Yeah.
That's when it came to have that name.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't get the name until that.
I also, as far as Hollywood is concerned, now you moved to Los Angeles when, in the early 60s? Or?
In the mid-60s.
Yeah, okay. And did you go out there specifically to write music for film?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. When I got out there, I soon as I got out there, because Quincy had gone out before me, and
Yes,
then Oliver
yes.
Nelson went out after him, and they were saying, "Come, come." What was that guy's? Greeley was saying, "Go West." Young
Horace
man."
Greeley.
Horace Greeley, yeah. And they had become him, the embodiment of him. So I went out there, and as soon as I got there, I went to work at Universal Studios on a new series by Robert Wagner. It's old now, called "It Takes a Thief." And then later I did the Partridge Family over at Columbia, and at Paramount I did Mission Impossible and Mannix and some other things.
Now, this was composing the music for it or playing in the...
Yeah. But there were other people's themes,
I see,
but
you
my internal music.
arranged.
Then
Okay.
finally I got my own show, and it died the death of a dog. I think it lasted a half a season.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
What was the show? Just
I've even forgotten the name. It was a girl from Room 222, Karen Valentine, and they gave her a show, and it didn't go over.
sank, huh? Like the Titanic.
Yeah.
What was the situation like in Los Angeles at that time? Well, two things I want to ask you. First, did you keep playing saxophone during all that? Or
No,
did you
no.
You,
I stopped. I figured I didn't like what I was playing, so I just stopped. And I didn't pick that horn up must have been 4 or 5 years, I guess. And then I got the bug again. I thought I was through. I was just going to write, And when I picked it up again, it was like getting over a stroke.
wow, really?
You know, everything
you
had
were
gone,
that
yeah.
impaired or something?
Yeah, it took me a long time to come back.
When you got to do that kind of work, were the studios at that time, had they been, was it I know that I knew African-American musicians in the 50s who had been playing in recording studios like Milt Hinton and Joe Wilder and people like that who had kind of had to face a somewhat segregated atmosphere. But what was Los Angeles like at that time? Was it cooler by that time?
It was beginning to change a bit. Gerald Wilson had done a couple of things, but, And then when Quincy came, it really started to open up.
Yeah.
Henry Mancini turned him on, and he did The Pawnbroker, and then he started doing some other things, Ironside, and then Oliver went out there, and
Who?
Oliver Nelson.
Okay.
And what did it do? $6 Million Man, some other things. Then I came, and then I started to work, and I did some shows there.
Was it satisfying work for you?
Oh, I loved it, but then I got tired of it.
Yeah.
My time wasn't my own. It was like a doctor on call. I had no time. I'd get up in the morning, I'd write all day, until midnight sometimes. Just write. And my wife and daughter would go out to the beach. I'd go to the front door with them and say goodbye. And go, and Oliver Nelson died. They gave me his show, The $6 Million Man. And while I was doing the episode, it was hard for me to do it because it had killed him. He worked so hard, and he was a fast writer. He had no time, and he would drink while he was writing, and he came by my house, and he told me he was just miserable. And then he died in the bathtub. And then I got the show, and I told my wife, I said, I think this is my last show. I don't feel it anymore. And when we got to the studio, all the musicians, all the violin players, and everybody was there, and all the chiefs, and I wanted to make a speech. And I know they wanted to kill me. I said, this music killed my friend, and there's no loyalty in the studios, the hierarchy. Oh, man. But I knew I was finished anyway, but I was finished. And that was it. And when I finished, all the musicians applauded.
Really?
I know they were sick of me.
What a story. All right, listen, let's get some questions from y'all. I know we've been talking here for a long time. Anybody have any questions to ask Mr. Golson before we have to wrap things up here this evening? Any saxophone players, arrangers? Somebody over here, the man in the shirt. Yes.
How long did you play with Coltrane?
How long did you play, were you associated musically with John Coltrane?
It was a long time, but when we played together as amateurs, aspiring musicians, trying to learn from each other. When I say each other, I mean the two of us and other musicians and the recordings. The only time we played together, and it wasn't really playing together, it was on a recording by George Russell called New York, New York.
Oh, yeah, with John Hendricks.
With John Hendricks. We were both on that. And we didn't see each other because we overdubbed. He overdubbed this part at one time, then I overdubbed my part another time, but we were on the same recording. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
You got one.
Oh, here we have a question up there.
One of the questions that I'm always concerned about, and it's in relationship to your spiritual side, as opposed to the cerebrum, the mental side of your music. It always feels so good, and I wonder how much of it is inspirational from a spiritual realm.
Well, I never thought in terms of spiritual. I just thought in terms of emotional. And what I wrote were musical, emotional responses. You know, like somebody says something to you, and if it's something that makes you angry, you're going to respond in one way. Or if a woman tells you she loves you, you're going to respond in another way. And that's the way I respond to my ideas, emotionally. So if I write a ballad, it's something that I've been thinking about that's emotional that way. A lost love, or my first wife who died, or whatever. But if it's something up here, it's not that at all. It's another kind of emotion.
Okay, somebody over there? I'll let the microphone come to you.
I was just gonna comment on how did it come about that you got replaced on the Messengers by Wayne Shorter? How did that come about?
Like I said, I told Art in the beginning, I didn't want to join the band because I wanted to be established. And after about a year, I felt I really wanted to get to that, to do something for my own future. And I had recommended many things while I was there, which he took a hold of to his advantage. You know, even the money came up. And I felt that it was time for me to go and do what I wanted to do rather than with the Messengers. So when I left, it was a very friendly thing, and Wayne Shorter took my place. But no one knows that after that, though, Art would always call me when certain things would come up or certain problems and ask me what did I think. And the only reason he did that is because what I caused to happen when I was with the group.
Did you recommend Wayne Shorter for the?
No, I didn't
No, yeah.
recommend him. Somebody else did.
How do you stay interested in the same songs over the years? And do you ever listen to yourself playing these things from decades ago and you can tell how you were feeling at the time?
How do you stay interested in playing the same songs? You have to keep in mind that jazz is about improvisation. No one comes to hear that melody over and over and over. You play the melody, then they want to know what you've got on your mind. I went to work one night and someone asked me, are you going to play Along Came Betty tonight? I said, yes. What solo are you going to play tonight? I said, I have no idea. See, the point is, we go to the same forest all the time, but we don't go to the same trees. We have different ideas. We feel this way at this moment, we feel another way at another moment. So it doesn't get boring because we don't play that same solo. I've played Along Came Betty, I can't know how many times, but I've never played the same solo. So that keeps it interesting. It makes it like an adventure. What will I do tomorrow that I didn't do today?
Can I rephrase the second part of you? Do you ever go back and listen to your old recordings?
Not much. When I first do them, I listen to them ad nauseum. Then I put it away. Looking back too often and too long is like driving a car and looking out the back window. You're going to run into something up front. I want to see where I'm going, not where I've been.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, I don't want to fall in love with things that I've done because you tend to level out and stop trying to create anything new. And the mind is capacious. The mind can hold incalculable amounts of information. So why limit yourself to just a few things? I don't sculpt it and then pet and rub it. I sculpt it and set it aside and go to something else.
Right down here? Right here.
When you write, do you tend to try to complete one piece of work that you're working on before you move on to the next piece of work? Or if that isn't the case, how do you keep track of the pieces?
That's a good question.
Good question. Sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. I've got tunes that I started as long as 20 years ago, more than that, and haven't completed them yet. Then I've got other tunes that I have completed. And it depends on how you feel on any given day. Sometimes you'll go to the piano and the ideas just come out. It's like things jumping out of the earth and grabbing you. And then sometimes you have to go with a shovel and try to dig them out, you know. Yeah, but it keeps it exciting. And don't think that everything I've written is great. I've written a lot of dogs that you'll never hear. Some horrible things.
You've mentioned that you worked with some vocalists in the 50s and that you also have written music for them. And sometimes there tends to be tension between vocalists and instrumentalists. So what do you think the responsibilities and the roles are of vocalists in the progression of jazz and just in the jazz scene in general?
Well, there's a vast difference between an instrumentalist and a vocalist. But any vocalist or any musician or any creative person is always trying to give their best. Sometimes I've heard somebody play a song and it gives me an inspiration, not to copy that song, but to do something else that may be reminiscent of that, or another idea completely.
Did you ever listen, were you ever influenced by singers at all in their way of phrasing?
Not in an overall sense, but in a general sense, in that when you play a ballad, it's different than Cherokee at the Speed of Light. When you play a ballad, it's metaphorically like singing through your instrument. Mm-hmm. It's not calisthenics,
right,
and athleticism. It's about sorrow or deep feelings. Mm-hmm. You know, there's so many songs about broken love affairs, mm-hmm. one after the other. And when you play a ballad, I always feel that you should sing symbolically through your instrument. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Linger on the notes. You have time to get a good sound out of each note. When you're playing, who's going to say, I think he made a mistake in the third bar on the upbeat of the fourth. Dizzy Gillespie said, play a song slow enough to eat a sandwich in between each beat, and you'll find out where everybody is. When you play a ballad, there is nowhere to hide. When you play here, lots of hiding places. Who's going to say, oh, I think his note was flat there in the third bar? Mm-hmm. When you play a ballad, it's like playing naked with no clothes on. Mm-hmm. You're totally exposed. Mm-hmm. It's a different animal, the ballad.
Wow, great. This is actually a guest in our town right now, a fine music writer in his own right. This is Ashley Kahn, who did the marvelous book on the making of So What by Miles Davis. Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Tom. Thanks. Benny, thanks for doing this. This is great. I've got to ask you, since your childhood friend John went on to such, avant-garde extremes by the 60s, and he left so many people, sort of behind as he did his own explorations. How did you feel about his, avant-garde approach and the way that he led so much of the jazz community, and down that avenue as well?
John did a lot of searching. He was like Picasso, who went through different periods, a blue period, and you remember he went through a period like that, pointillism, different periods, and he was like that. And his practice was Spartan-like. Every day, hour upon hour, like a man who had no talent. And he did a lot of searching, but at no time did his searching exceed his grasp. He was able to grasp it. He came by the house one time in New York, and I said, well, what are you doing now? He says, I'm practicing Art Tatum runs. And that's when they dubbed what he was doing ribbons of sound. He could do that at will, but he could also play the low-down dirty blues. We all came from that. Although he's playing all this avant-garde stuff, he never forgot how to play the deepest version or element of the blues, and that's where it all started from. Yeah, he was a master worker.
Looking back on it now, and the way that he affected the jazz scene and how there's this avant-garde edge that exists to this day. That was do you see that as a leap forward, much like, say, bebop was from the swing era in the 40s?
Absolutely. You see, but what was considered avant-garde then is not necessarily avant-garde now. See, time has to catch up to what's going on. Sometimes, like Thelonious Monk, when he was alive in the last days of his life, he wasn't even working. He couldn't get arrested. And now everything is Thelonious Monk. But see, actually he had arrived a long time ago, but people were at the wrong station, you see. That's what happened.
Thank you.
Yeah, they couldn't comprehend. And so what was new and avant-garde yesterday, hey, tomorrow it'll be old hat. Yeah.
One or two more questions, huh? Yes, ma'am.
When you were learning how to play jazz, or even later when you were starting to compose and arrange, were there things that people told you or that you were reading amongst yourselves that helped you get a handle on stuff like the chords, the scales, all that sort of thing?
Lots of things that people told me, but lots of things I had to distill and throw aside. You know, before you throw things aside, though, you have to consider them. You know, that's the wise thing to do. So as a result, I like rhythm and blues. I like country and western. Some of those country and western lyrics will bring you to tears. You know, and some of the hip hop stuff, some of the subject matter is not so good sometimes, but got a nice beat and things like that. And the other thing is, who am I to say that people shouldn't do other kinds of music? Voltaire said, I disagree with everything you say, but will fight to the death for your right to say it. And that's the way it is. If I disagree with somebody else and think that they shouldn't do it, they're looking at me thinking the same thing. And I know I'm going to continue to do what I want to do because that's all I know how to do. Yes, you hear a lot of things, but you have to learn to distill. You pick, it's like going to the market. Yeah, I'll take this cantaloupe. No, this one's too hard. And, you know, yeah, you hear lots of things.
I know you're a musician and a writer, and sort of how did you decide what to balance and how to balance that, and what made you do one and what made you do the other, and I don't know, how do you balance all the things that you do together?
When you look at me, you're looking at a musical bigamist. I love them both. I embrace them both. It's no problem. And when I do one, the other one doesn't exist. And when I do the other one doesn't exist. The two never mix.
What happens if one sees you with the other in the market or something?
Then I'm in trouble.
Listen, I think this has just been an extraordinary experience to listen to Benny Golson talk to us about so many wonderful things. And we want to thank you for just generously sharing your time with us and your insights and your life experience. Thank you so much. Benny Golson.
Thank you.